Okay, hello everybody, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us today. So in our session today, we'll be talking about what makes the best teaching case study and how you can make yours stand out amongst the crowd. We'll also be sharing details with you on our Emerald CEEMAN Cases competition. So I just want to start with a couple of housekeeping items. The webinar today will last 1 hour. But we'll be recording it, so feel free to share with colleagues when we send that around. There is time for a Q&A at the end, but if you want to ask questions as we're going along, please feel free to put those in the question panel, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar viewer. My name is Andrea Longrig. I'm a marketing manager at Emerald Publishing, and I'll introduce our presenters today. So first we have Olga Velaguska, who is the Director of CEEMAN, the International Association for Management Development in Dynamic Societies, which unites over 200 members from 53 countries all over the world, including universities, business schools, professional associations, companies and individuals. We also welcome Dr. Michael Goldman, who teaches at the University of San Francisco's Sport Management Master's Program. Michael also holds an adjunct faculty role with the Gordon Institute of Business Science in Johannesburg and is the editor-in-chief of Emerald Publishing's Emerging Markets Case Studies. And finally from Emerald, we have Gabby Rundle, who is our cases publisher, who will talk to you a little bit about the logistics of the competition and how you can enter. So now I will hand over to Olga to start her presentation.
Hello everyone. Let me see if I'm sharing the right screen. There we go. Can you see my presentation? Gabi, yeah? Okay. Okay, yes. I hope it shows well. So what I wanted to do today is just to say a brief hello and make a quick introduction to what CEEMAN is actually and how we ended up with running the case writing competition. And just to show also a couple of photos what the competition has in stock for you if you end up among the winners. So CEEMAN was established originally as a Central and East European Association for Management Development. Thus, you can see the word CEE in its name, in the acronym. But then over the years, we have developed more into focusing on the issues of transition in general and change in management, education and management development. And we saw that not only CEE, but also other regions share a lot of similarities and challenges and values in common. So that's how we changed and developed our name into focusing more on dynamic society. So we work now not only with Central and Eastern Europe, but also with Latin America, with Africa, with other emerging markets. But our focus still remains the same. We devote a lot of attention to faculty development, to staff development, to organizing international conferences and events, joint research and publications, also organizing competitions and awards. And of course, we saw that it's very important, especially for developing markets, to have their own local cases relevant for the local context and local issues. So that's how we started with the case writing competition. And all our activities in general, they have this focus on relevance in general. If we talk about our events or programs or networking opportunities or international quality accreditation procedure, it's all based on relevance as well as excellence, doing the best that you can in the context that you're operating in. So the case writing competition is actually one of our longest running activities. It started in 1996, and since 2007, we have been running it together with Emerald Group Publishing as our partner. And the aim is, as I mentioned already, to create and promote active use of local and regional cases and foster case writing capabilities in our markets. So the competition has both monetary and non-monetary prizes. It has publication opportunities with Emerald to get your work visible, to get it published. And also in the course of the competition, especially if you submit before the final submission deadline, you have an opportunity to receive quick preliminary feedback from the judges on your case. I will introduce already here a little bit on the competition timeline, and I'm sure Gabi will mention it as well, but just, you know, that you keep in mind the overall flow of the competition, what's happening after this webinar. And we wanted to run this webinar in advance of the deadline, so you have time to prepare and fine-tune your case for the submission. So the early case submission, and that is specifically having in mind the possibility of you get quick preliminary feedback from the judges and work further on your case before the final submission deadline. So the early case submission deadline is 21st of March. So there is more than a month and a half now for you to think of potential submissions. And then the final case submission deadline is in mid-May. That is determined to have in mind the early enough announcement of the winners to enable their attendance of the CEEMAN annual conference, which traditionally takes place in the end of September. And we really, really hope that by the end of September, we all will be able to meet in person. And the location of the conference, which every year takes place in a different country, this time will be beautiful Adriatic coast city of Trieste, Italy, you know, on the intersection of West and East and many cultures. So it would be really, really something special. And please keep your fingers crossed as well that it will be possible in person. So the winners will be invited to attend the conference and receive their prize in person. We also offer from CEEMAN side, in addition to monetary prize and publication opportunities from Emerald, we offer a scholarship for attendance of our flagship faculty development program, IMTA, International Management Teachers Academy. And this is really a very, very special program that has earned its place among the top faculty development programs around the world. Because since year 2000 that we have started IMTA, we have educated more than 650 management educators in more than 50 countries around the world. And besides improving teaching skills and methods and materials, particular emphasis on case method, case teaching, as well as case writing, this program is also wonderful opportunity and platform for further professional development and international collaboration among the alumni. Just 2 words about how it's run. So typically it takes place over 2 weeks, 2 parts, where first one is general, talking about various pedagogical issues, and the second is very hands-on, very boutique format, working with one faculty member in smaller groups in specific disciplines. The typical class is very international, literally from all over the world. And we also have special scholarships for participants from Africa, Latin America, in Asia, if your financial possibilities are constrained. Yeah, so just to give an impression what's in stock for you. Here are just a couple of things also about the annual conference. It's several-day event, so number of opportunities to meet with colleagues, with deans from all over the world, to enjoy new culture, to learn something new, to show and promote your own work, and of course to build new connections. So thank you so much. That was very brief introduction from me. Please do not hesitate contacting me if you have any questions about CEEMAN or our activities or anything related to this competition as well. I will be happy to hear from you and to connect with you. Thank you so much. I will turn this off now and I will give the floor to Michael to talk more about how to make a winning case. There we go. Okay, does it work? Michael, do you have the presenter rights now? Okay.
Yes, all good. Thank you.
Super.
Well, thanks everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this session. I think what's so exciting, as you heard from Olga, is this opportunity to host this competition again after so many years, so many successful years, with many of the scholars that are part of the CEEMAN network. And so, as editor-in-chief of Emerald's Emerging Market Case Studies, we're obviously very delighted to work together on this and to further surface and highlight and profile the important questions that our cases from emerging markets, from dynamic economies, certainly can share with the world. We really want students around the world to be learning about how to navigate some of these difficult, complex management decision-making environments in these dynamic spaces. What I'd like to do briefly today is talk a little bit about what we're seeing come through across the competition around cases from these kinds of markets, and how you can both start your case, if that's the agenda for you over the next few weeks, but also how you can develop a great case, so to go from good to great as you think about the competition and perhaps some of the tangible and intangible prizes that Olga mentioned for the competition. If we take a step back, I think it's really important as we think about case research and writing to consider why we're doing this. And for some scholars that we work with around the world, they're looking for more than just the citations. They're looking for more than just getting a hit, right? Getting something published. And there is this growing momentum, I think, within business schools, within institutions around the world to make a real impact, to do work as part of our intellectual contribution that really impacts the environment and the society in which we operate. I think that's something we are very committed to when it comes to case research, because of the process of how we do cases, how we research rigorous cases, but also what happens to those documents. So in the process of writing great quality cases, it's a partnership with the organization. It's a really deep dive and a close look at how that organization does what they do, so that we can fully understand the dynamics of decision making. It's about getting close to executives and collaborating with them to create the research. It's about spending a number of weeks or months within the organization where we learn from them and they may learn from us as researchers through the process. That's about making a real impact through how we do the research. I think the second component of that that's really interesting is that publishing is just the first step. And when we think about making an impact in the society in which many of our institutions are publicly funded, it is important that we think about what happens with our research, what happens with our publications. And whether it's the AACSB or CEEMAN or Emerald's thinking around real impact, we're seeing a shift towards considering what happens after publication. I think what excites me about the impact of good quality discussion-based case research is that those good quality cases are used in classrooms around the world almost immediately. That instructors are taking our instructor manuals and prepping on a Sunday night and putting our cases into the classroom on Monday morning, working with students in many markets, including developed economies, to really learn how decision-making happens in these contexts, how our research about many of the most interesting companies, entrepreneurs, family-owned businesses, startups, social entrepreneurship spaces, how that research translates into practical guidelines for managers and emerging students in the classroom. So it's about the real impact. And I think that's an important shift that many of us are seeing and many of us subscribe to. And that's what excites us about the opportunity around case research. We've seen other scholars, Clayton Christensen, for example, comment in the last 2 years about his work. And as he looked back over some of his early work, and you may know him from the disruptive innovation space, you may know Clayton Christensen's work more recently around marketing innovation. And you can see here in this quotation from our friends at the MIT Sloan Management Review, how he reflected on the role of qualitative, long-term, longitudinal work in organizations. As he says here, going and sitting across the desk and understanding from decision makers how they do what they do. It's data that the typical survey data, the typical quantitative survey data does not give us. It gives us that insight into how people do what they do and why they do what they do. So people like Clayton Christensen recognizing the role of case research in the portfolio of their intellectual contribution. I think, again, that reinforces the opportunity for us. A last point on this, you may have seen this American Marketing Association, the Journal of Marketing editorial recently, early in 2021, talking about the connection from a marketing discipline point of view between thinking and doing. And the editors lay out a very clear argument here for how it needs to be a partnership, how our research, especially in marketing for this journal, how our research needs to strongly connect with practice. And this is a debate we know we've had for many years around relevance and rigor. And we're seeing more and more articulation of this idea of getting close, of collaborating, of partnering. And in this editorial, again, you'll see the focus around case research, the opportunity to write case research, write case studies through that process, and then after it's published, and think about the impact we make in that space. Of course, we are talking about discussion-based case studies. And so it's important as we think about case research that we draw a distinction. And if we think about some of the submissions we have seen over the last few years, a few of those submissions to this important competition are sometimes article cases. This is good quality case research, but it is written in a typical article format, a typical article style, which, as we know, is less appropriate for a discussion-based case class. And so we want to be very clear. We're focused here in this competition, certainly in the cases that we publish at Emerging Market Case Studies, on discussion-based cases, which in some markets may be called teaching cases. So it's those cases that are well researched, using a full kind of Robert Yin's idea of a case study database, thinking about triangulation, so good rigor in how we write the case and research the issues within the case. But then the style, the genre, the structure, the format of what we create is a case study and a teaching note that's part of a discussion-based case. And so that's really, really important as you think about preparing your work for this competition. Importantly, we are looking for discussion-based cases that focus on a decision. You want to have a protagonist, a main character within the case that is trying to deal with some kind of dilemma. There is a decision that's pending, something that's serious, something that's urgent, where that manager or her colleagues are considering how to make a decision in the dynamic economy, the emerging market context that they currently find themselves. Is it about growth? Is it about cost cutting? Is it about navigating certain regulatory issues? Is it about understanding internally some of the people management talent issues around recruitment and retention? Is it a financial question of how to structure a merger and acquisition deal or how to go to the market for funding? These are the kinds of decisions and dilemmas that we often see coming through in good quality case submissions for this competition. Cases can be descriptive. They can tell a story of the process the organization has walked to this point. But the point is still really important. So we can have both the descriptive part where you tell a story of the last few years that led the organization to this decision point, but the focus is the decision point. And why is that important? Well, we know from a pedagogy and andragogy, right? So different kinds of learning approaches, we know that students find cases more engaging and get more out of the case study process, and instructors are able to achieve more in the classroom when the students identify with the character, when they can walk a mile in the character or protagonist's shoes, when there is a practical, serious decision that needs to be taken that they can really focus on and it's real. It's not fiction, it's real, it's identifiable. Yeah, and they can really get their teeth into that and work through the issues in the case with the analysis, with the synthesis, with collaboration with their classmates, either virtually or physically, in order to solve that problem in the case. So it's based on real data, often primary data, good secondary sources, well-researched, a real situation with a real protagonist facing some kind of issue within the case. And as I mentioned, serious and urgent. Those are two criteria that I often keep in mind as I'm writing my cases. How do I make sure that the dilemma or the decision that I'm building into the case, that I'm building the case around, is serious for that protagonist, serious for that organization, that it is more strategic, that it is less trivial and urgent. Where's the urgency? Where's the energy? Where's the drama, right? And in business, there's a lot of drama, right? You walk the corridors, you sit in on board meetings, and you know there's lots of drama. And so how do we build that heat into the case so that students are engaged, so they can't put it down, right? So if they do print out the case or they get the traditional PDF, they're reading those 8 pages, they can't put it down until it's finished. They really want to analyze and discuss this case. So that's the focus of the kinds of cases that we're looking for and the kind of cases that typically do really well in this kind of competition. I mentioned style and format and genre. I want to give you a quick example here just to emphasize my point. These are 2 pieces of my work here as an example. On the left of the slide, if you're able to see my screen, is an article, right? It's a typical academic article that's published in a journal. This would be the International Journal of Sport Management and Marketing. That's a mouthful. And so look at the title, right? It's a typical academic kind of publication, and the introduction has lots of references, and it's written for us as scholars, right? When we do this kind of academic work, we're writing for each other. Maybe our mothers will read it, but typically we're writing it for the few scholars around the world that have a similar interest in order to get cited, in order to contribute to the body of knowledge in that space. We are researchers writing for other researchers. On the right-hand side is an example of a typical case study narrative. The title is much more focused, it's shorter, it includes the name of the organization and the issue that the case is addressing. So here we wrote about the BrightRock life insurance brand in Southern Africa, and we spoke about the brand, right? It's about building the brand. So we try and build that into a short, sharp, appealing, interesting title. And then if I know the text is a bit small, but you can see the typical, what we call the opening gambit or the introduction of the case. It's like the first few minutes of a great movie, the first few pages of a great book that grabs you, grabs your attention, pulls you in, and starts to tell you the story. And very quickly tells you key parts of the story. Where are we? When are we? Who are the main characters? What kind of issue are they facing? That's how we tell great stories, and that's what we need to do in these opening sections of a case study. So here we see Suzanne Stevens, let's see, it's at January 2015, and she's standing in Johannesburg, and we have a sense of how she's feeling, and we get information in the first paragraph of the business decision or challenge that she's facing. The case then fleshes that out. It develops it over 7 or 8 pages, giving a lot more information and details that the students can then analyze to help Suzanne Stevens, or whoever the protagonist is, solve her problem, make the decision that she needs to make. So the genre, the style, the format, the structure is really important, right? One is writing with good quality discussion-based cases. One is writing for 2 audiences. You're writing for the students so that it is something that they can identify with, that they can connect with, it's relevant to them, and it is interesting and engaging. You're writing for the instructors so that they can see that the case narrative, the typical 8 pages, is something that students will want to read and deals with an issue that they want to surface in the classroom and allows them to teach key theoretical concepts, management frameworks based on the learning outcomes that they want to achieve in that classroom situation. And so we want to keep both of those audiences in mind. We want to make sure that the case is alive, that it is interesting, that it grabs the reader and pulls the reader the whole way through. But at the same time, it can't just be a story. It's a story with a purpose. It's a story with a key theoretical contribution sitting behind it, layered into the case. And so we need to keep the instructor perspective in mind, the learning outcomes, the theoretical contribution in mind as well. That fits as part of the story. So it's about weaving. We're weaving these pieces, these threads together to create a good quality 8-page narrative. And of course, the 8+ page instructor manual that goes with it, the teaching note. So let me spend a few moments on the structure of these documents, these physical documents that you'll submit, of course, digital as well. The case study signed off by the organization. Any primary data that's gathered from the organization needs to be approved. Consent needs to be received from the organization. So interviews with protagonists, with customers, with suppliers, with colleagues, right? Multiple interviews contributes to good quality data. Documentary analysis, annual reports, meeting minutes, internal documents, team discussion documents, any kind of internal documents that the organization is happy for you to look at and that you can then source in the case study. Those are the primary data sources that we typically see. The third one, I guess, is also observation. And we do find in some cases where you have a longer term relationship with the organization that the authors are able to bring in some kind of observations. And it's typically written into the case as part of scene setting, as part of understanding who the protagonist is and what they're doing in the organization and the situations that characters find themselves in the situation. Again, primary data based on author observations, perhaps spending time with the organization. So that's primary data. Of course, cases can also be based on secondary data or a combination of primary and secondary data. If a case is developed only from secondary source data, then company sign-off is not required. But the tricky part then is to build a compelling character and to build a real dilemma only from secondary sources. To do this, you need to go and find those interviews that other people have done with the protagonist. You need to go find those profile write-ups or those in-depth articles that others have written about the protagonist, about the organization. One may need to draw on, for example, testimony in regulatory filings, in competition hearings, any kind of official documents where company officials or others have provided testimony, and that is now part of the public record. That is a really good quality secondary source data that can give lots of interesting texture and information to a good case study. Of course, the students get the case study, they read it, that's what they engage with, typically an 8-page PDF that they're accessing on their learning management system or obviously from Emerald Insight, and it has the management dilemma and it has the protagonist character. The teaching note is sometimes even more critical than the case study. The teaching note is where we do 2 important jobs. The first is to help the instructor use the case effectively to teach key learning outcomes, to achieve key learning outcomes. So we're thinking about crafting those learning outcomes. We think about the discussion questions that are used for perhaps preparation into the class session or discussion in the room or perhaps assignment or exam work afterwards. So those assignment or discussion questions are critical. The teaching plan. A good quality teaching plan that captures what we may do in a physical classroom, but also what we might do in a hybrid classroom environment or a high flex classroom environment, as well as an online or remote classroom environment. What are those good quality learning methods that we want to use and integrate into this teaching note to make this case really come alive? So that's the first important objective of a teaching note. The second is to demonstrate scholarship. And so in the model answers to the discussion or assignment questions in the teaching note, we're drawing in good quality literature and recent theories that help both explain what's happening within the case, but also perhaps suggest what kind of variables or relationships or dynamics are happening within the case. So we're bringing in scholarship and we're using that to craft model quality answers, the kind of answers that might get an A+ in an exam. We need to do that work as writers to write those answers into the teaching note. That's why the students never see the teaching note. The teaching note is for instructors. It's written with those very two important priorities, and it's typically not shared with many people at all. It's typically only for the instructor. And as I mentioned, it's 8+ pages. It could be 8, 10, 12 pages, depending on the quality of the analysis. An assignment question, maybe 4 or 5 assignment questions. Each one of those may have 3/4 to a page of a good quality model answer. So it gives you the sense of the depth and the rigor that comes through in a good quality teaching note, especially those that do well in the competition. I want to highlight here some important, I guess, reflections as we've thought about submissions to the competition over the last few years. We've mentioned the protagonist, the dilemma, the date, and the location. Getting that into the opening section. It's a section I love writing when I work on cases. It's a section that I iterate and probably write a dozen times between starting a case project and perhaps 3 to 6 to 9 months later when that case is actually published. It's a bit of a living document, a living section of the document, because as you flesh out the rest of the case, as you develop the teaching note in an iterative process, we're doing those two documents almost at the same time in parallel, back and forth between them. We're going back and checking those opening few sentences. Do they capture what the case is really about? Do they effectively grab you and pull you in? The narrative style, as I've mentioned, is really important. We're writing in the past tense throughout the entire narrative. If a case is based in October 2020, all the information in the case must be from October 2020 or before. There cannot be anything in the case from after that decision point. And everything we write in the case has happened in the past. You may be teaching the case in 2021. The case may be taught by one of your colleagues in 2025. Think about that when you're writing. Everything is in the past tense. We've spoken about the storytelling flow, and that dilemma needs to be a thread throughout the entire case, not just top and tail, not just in the first few lines and the last few lines. The dilemma, the core issue facing the protagonist or the characters needs to come through the entire case. And then in terms of language style, remember we write in the objective third person, right? We are telling a story. We want the voice of the characters to come through, sometimes in quotations, sometimes in a little bit of dialogue, but typically quality cases use quotations from the characters and the protagonist and other characters in the case to effectively bring that voice into the narrative. Think about writing for an international audience in terms of having your case adopted and having a real impact with many hundreds of faculty and thousands of classrooms using your case. You want it to be accessible. You want to make sure that any geographic specificity is clearly explained, that there may be things about the market or the culture or the national practices related to the case, that those are very easily understood and explained within the narrative of the case. And of course, first language English editing. It's important, again, that your case is accessible and that it looks and feels and smells and tastes like any other good quality piece of work. I spoke about the teaching note. Those are the typical sections that we've touched on. And as Gabby may mention, there are a number of resources available to you via Emerald Publishing to help you structure both the case and the teaching note that I encourage you to take a look at. So those are my few thoughts today. Let me stop sharing my screen here. Very open to questions as you think about the project that you're undertaking. We are, as I said, very, very excited about receiving your submissions. We think this is a fabulous process and we can't wait to read the cases that we know you're putting together. Gabby, I think it's over to you.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That was really useful. I'm just checking, can you all see my screen here? Brilliant, thank you. All right, let me just move on. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the submission process to the competition, how the kind of review process works, the judging, and kind of what we do with the submission. And then, as Michael mentioned, I'm going to talk a bit about the resources that we've got. So if you're considering submitting, what you can kind of do after this session that might help provide kind of the best case study possible. Sorry, I was on there. Brilliant. So all cases submitted to this will be considered for publication in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. So, I mean, all these slides will be sent out after the session. So all the links, you will have all of these. So the first link there is a link to the ScholarOne submission site. So all submissions are made as per our standard emerging markets case studies submissions. There's a question when you submit if you're submitting to a competition. So you just select the CEEMAN competition there. All cases submitted, as I said, go into consideration in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. So I would suggest you look at the EMCS author guidelines before you submit. And all cases should have a developing and emerging markets focus. So that's just kind of one of, kind of a very standard guideline we have for EMCS. So do please look at those guidelines and kind of work through those. Make sure your submission is in line with those guidelines. As Michael said, all cases should be based on a real life situation. So we do allow cases submitted if, primary research is great and there are always benefits to that. If you can just do secondary research, that's fine. We're open to submissions where kind of either type of research has been carried out. And Michael touched on this as well, that it is important you ensure that all necessary permissions have been cleared prior to submission. So as he said, if you've conducted the primary research or had interviews with the protagonist or perhaps a number of people at that organisation, as a publisher, we need to make sure that we have their permission to publish the case study that you've written with their input. And again, there's more information on that under those guidelines. Going to mention again, I know Olga mentioned this, but we've got kind of two deadlines there. Sorry, so I should have put the second one there first. So the 21st of March is the early submission deadline. So what that means is if you can submit before the 21st of March, I would really encourage you to do that. Your case then goes to the judges, who will provide you with a kind of brief but very useful bit of feedback on your case and teaching note. It gives you the opportunity to resubmit your case study prior to that final deadline of the 16th of May. So if you kind of get to mid-March, your case isn't the final version it's going to be when you submit, I would still really encourage you to submit that if you can for the early submission deadline. Take that feedback on board when you get that and revise and resubmit it for that final deadline. But of course, that's not compulsory. So if you need to be working towards the later deadline, we're open to submissions, on the 16th. It doesn't have to be that revision. But I really would encourage you to kind of keep that first date in mind as well. The prizes, Olga mentioned this as well. So in total, first, second and third has a total prize fund of €4,000, and that includes 2,500 for the winning case study. And then the Emerald Cases Hub, I'm going to touch on in just a second. If I can move my slide, here we go. And then just a bit more information on the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. So kind of at any point, you know, outside of this competition as well, we're always open to submissions. We're also open to kind of collaboration. So if you're thinking you might be interested in reviewing for the collection, my email address is there. Please do reach out. Or if you're interested in proposing a special section of the collection, that would be, you know, really useful to hear from you as well. And then there are just some links there as well that I think might come in handy for when you're writing your case study for this competition. The whole collection is linked to there, and we've put together a virtual issue of past winning CEEMAN cases. So again, if you have access to Emerald e-cases, I think it's really worth kind of logging on and having a look at those resources. And then I'm going to show you the Cases Hub very quickly. So again, show my screen. Here we go. Can you see the Cases Hub now? Sorry, if someone can say audibly if you can see
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry. So the Cases Hub is a free online resource that we developed to help case writers in kind of whatever stage of their case writing career. So if you're new to this, I think this would be really worthwhile for you to have a look at. If you're a more experienced case writer, but you might maybe struggle with kind of one of the aspects of case writing, or might just want to kind of give yourself a bit of a refresher, this is a really useful resource. So we've got modules on here, as well as writing a case study. We've got modules on how to teach a case study. And then on here under useful resources, if I just go on here, I wanted to point out we've got some sample cases and teaching notes. So if you don't your institution doesn't subscribe to Emerald, it would be really useful for you to log on and have a look on here. It contains the Bright Rock case that Michael wrote and mentioned in his slides. So again, you know, published in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, I think that would give you kind of a good indication of what you're kind of working towards creating. And then if I just quickly go into the writing a case study module, it has sections that kind of talks you through every stage of writing a case study. So here, identifying a need, why should you write a case study, getting ready to write, so what topic you might be covering, how to gather your data, all the way through to actually writing the case study, which potentially at this stage for the competition might be where you are. So there's tips on there on the case and the teaching note, which, as Michael said, is, you know, kind of one of the most important parts of the submission. And then finally there we've got the evaluating your case study. So there are tips on there on, you know, doing a final kind of proofread prior to submission, as well as how to deal with a review process. So again, all of these cases go into the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection for consideration. So there will be reviews completed on these. So it may well be that you'll be given feedback, you know, further down the line and asked to kind of review and revise your case study. So there are tips on here at kind of every stage. And again, this is linked to on those slides, and it's free for anyone to access and view. So I'd really encourage any of you considering submitting to consider having a look at that. And then we should just be back on my slide here. So if we've got a fair bit of time left now for questions, we've got around 15 minutes. So I will hand the, am I okay to keep presenting, Andrea, kind of just this slide, and then you?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had quite a few questions through, so I'll just work my way through them. Okay.
Brilliant.
So we have Is the competition open to work professionals from industry or only for students/faculty?
I would expect someone from a business school to be an author on each case submitted. So very often we see that there might be a kind of more experienced faculty member, there might be a student, and there might be someone from the business named as authors on these. We don't kind of have any restrictions in terms of, you know, what kind of level anyone needs to be within academia to submit, but I would say it's unlikely that we would have someone, you know, a set of authors where no one is linked to a business school submitting to this. So I would suggest if you're kind of in industry and think that this is something that you might be really interested in, please reach out to, you know, if you have any contacts kind of within business schools. I think or send your details to me even. I always get asked, you know, authors saying, I want to write a case, but I don't have access to someone kind of within an industry. Michael, I don't know if you kind of wanted to add anything there, or that kind of covered it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think that partnering, if you're in business and you're interested in contributing a case, partnering with faculty at a business school within an emerging market, I think makes a lot of sense. And the one critical reason why that's important is objectivity. Sometimes when we are executives in our own organization and we want to write a case, whether we want to or not, it's going to come out perhaps a bit more positive than it should. And although we don't want to be overtly critical about any organization, we do want to provide a balanced view, and we want good quality, rigorous analysis of that situation. And we want a case narrative that has many sides, that has at least two sides to the case analysis. So we must be careful of cases that are glowing about an organization, as successful as that organization may be, that doesn't have any controversy, that doesn't have any decision or dilemma that's being faced. The reality of the nuts and bolts and messiness of an organization is what we want to see come through. And so that objectivity is an important aspect to ensure in the writing. So certainly the work that I've done with executives, that partnership, I think, is a really useful approach, where business school faculty who are used to writing cases, who are used to using cases in the classroom, are able to bring through that style and that approach to capturing the story.
I would like to add also, from our experience in CEEMAN, we see an increasing number of executives also making this transition to academia to an extent, because business schools, they need more teachers with practical skills, with practical experience, with real business experience. And on the other hand, executives, they often find their new calling into transferring their wisdom, their expertise to the new generation of managers. So, and writing a case is a wonderful opportunity for this practitioner academics, academics of practice, to learn more how to weave in the theoretical concepts and backgrounds into their practical experience and transfer this and apply this in the classroom. But for this, I would fully agree both with Gabby and Michael that partnership is probably would be the best way to go about it, that you find an experienced case writer, an accomplished case writer, then you have a person who is either purely executive or an executive teaching in the classroom, to work as a team, or maybe inviting some of the graduate students to contribute, because this will complement different perspectives and different views on the case and how it's presented to the audience, and it will only benefit from that. So from our side, we certainly welcome such cases very much.
Okay, so the next question is, what is in quotes? Should it be past tense or present tense? I think this.
So in the case narrative, you are capturing the words as quotations, as direct quotations from the transcript, from the interviews that you may be conducting with the characters, with the protagonist within the organization, or you are quoting from other sources, from interviews that people have given or testimony that they've given in certain context. You are therefore quoting it directly. And so it's a direct quotation, and you would use the tense of the quotation. You would write that within a narrative, within a paragraph, within a context that is the past tense. And so Suzanne Stevens may comment in the Bright Rock case about how life insurance in South Africa had been marketed in a very complex way, and that many prospective consumers in South Africa didn't understand the documents they were signing, perhaps, and didn't understand this life insurance product. So her quotation may be in the present tense, for example, when she says it, when we interview her, when she's quoted. But when we craft that in our writing in the paragraph, we would say something like, Suzanne Stevens reflected on the complexity being faced in the marketplace when she said, and then there's the quotation. So we want to be truthful and authentic to the words of the protagonist, but we want to place it within a story that is the past tense. Just on that point, I mean, I think it's sometimes tougher for us when we explain what we do to clearly explain the process. And that's why, as Gabby mentioned, reading winning cases and really kind of consuming those as an artist looking to understand the craft, I think is a great way to make some of these ideas come alive. That the process of how we write, go and look at great work. Spend time studying great work is one way to help you think about how you might create great work as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next one is, we had submitted a case in Emerald earlier, but it was rejected. Can I resubmit after rephrasing the case study?
Yeah, I mean, shall I kind of take this and pass over to you, Michael? Is that okay? So I would say in some circumstances we will allow this if the case kind of really has been comprehensively rewritten. So we would kind of, when a case study is submitted, we can give, you know, a number of decisions on that case. So for example, a major revision where, you know, we will give comprehensive feedback to the author and include suggestions on, you know, what kind of things they need to change, but encourage them to resubmit their case. And we will work with those authors and the reviewers kind of look at the revision of that case and kind of do what we can to kind of push it over the line for it to be accepted. So when a case is rejected, it really kind of means that a very comprehensive rewrite is required before we can then consider that case for publication. So I would kind of want to stress kind of the extent of changes that would be needed. So I would say, you know, whatever feedback it is that you've had kind of from the editors on that, really do take that on board, because if, you know, kind of any minor changes are made based on that, I would, you know, think it would be fair to assume it's likely to be rejected again. Michael, do you kind of want to build on that?
I think you've said it well. I mean, in my personal experience, when I reflect on some of the cases I wrote 15, 20 years ago, I kind of hide away in the corner. You know, I guess part of what we need to recognize as scholars is that when we get feedback, which is always difficult and is tough to handle, and you know, we know about reviewer 2, reviewer 3 with the nasty feedback, we need to think about more than just tweaking. And certainly what we see with submissions to emerging market case studies is authors sometimes feel they take the feedback poorly. They sometimes take it personally, and they feel like if they just make a few tweaks, if they change a few words here, change a few words there, change a sentence or two, it kind of does what the reviewers want. The reality is, when you're creating a case or an instructor manual, you need to do more than just tweak, and the revisions are more typically than about tweaking. If something has been have a major revision or a rejection or an unsubmit from a previous process, what the author should be hearing is that there are substantial issues that require kind of going back to the drawing board, almost going back and saying, okay, if I was to start again, as difficult as that is, but that's an important process. If I was to start again, what would the building blocks of a quality case be here? And that's certainly something that I see a lot with submissions, is we kind of need to go back to first principles. We need to go back to the building blocks and start again. There may be some data. You don't need to throw everything out. There may be some data that you've got that can be useful in writing a great case from scratch. But you need to go back and start with the dilemma and the protagonist and the story and the theory and the learning outcomes. Have the building blocks clear, and then you can attach some of the stuff you've already got. It's more than tweaking.
Yeah, so I hope, so the kind of the answer to that is yes, we would accept that. And I hope me and Michael haven't been too kind of negative about that. I think just so long as kind of the intention to kind of go back to basics and redevelop that case is there, then yes, absolutely, we would look at that again. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, so the next question is, how many cases will be selected as winners and receive prizes?
So the top 3 cases will be selected as winners and receive prizes. But as I said, all cases that submitted are considered for publication in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection. And sorry, I didn't mention this, but every case published in the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, we pay authors the equivalent of £100 upon publication of their case. So although there are only those kind of financial prizes for the top 3 of the competition, the submission to the Emerging Markets Case Studies collection, there's that kind of £100 payment that we make as well.
Okay, can we use the present tense in an opening passage to create a sense of urgency?
Michael, are you okay to take this on?
Typically not. I mean, the sense of urgency is typically expressed through a imminent decision, a decision that is required soon. And so Suzanne Stevens has an important meeting coming up with the rest of the executive team. She knows that although she's had a good few years with some solid performances, you know, you're only as good as your next plan, your next quarter. And she wonders, given the short tenure of chief marketing officers, whether her time with the organization is perhaps coming to an end if she can't, you know, create a fabulous plan. So it's about bringing seriousness and urgency. It's not about a decision that's due in 3 or 4 months' time. So you want to locate the timing of the case where the decision is fairly soon, fairly urgent, because that adds to the heat and the drama of the situation. So our choice as writers in where we locate the point at which the story starts. The story typically is, you know, 5 minutes to midnight, right? The story is just before the decision needs to be made. But that's still in the past tense, because if I'm writing about January 2015 and I'm teaching the case, even in February 2015, I'm talking about the past. And so no, everything is expressed in the past tense. But if someone has an interesting example that they're playing with, or a paragraph they want to bounce off us, they're most welcome to send it through. We're always interested in taking a look and giving some feedback informally if there's a specific way of phrasing that sentence that someone wants to check.
Thank you. Have we got time for kind of one more question? I just wanted to kind of mention that if we don't get to your questions, we will have them listed and we'll kind of get back in touch with you. So if we don't get to your question now, we'll kind of get back in touch with you. But Andrew, I don't know if we've got time for one more.
Yeah, could we maybe squeeze in one more? And then, yeah, we do have quite a few left, so we'll get back to those individually. So can you please explain how to cite references in the case? Is there any difference than with articles?
Yes, so we want to look at readability. And for the readability of the case, for the accessibility of the case in classrooms around the world, we typically use endnotes. So you've got the superscript numbers, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The superscript numbers in the narrative text. And then you've got at the end of the case a list of endnotes, and those are typically referenced using APA 6 or 7 format. As you would a typical reference, you're doing those in the endnotes, but in the narrative text, you're using the superscript endnotes to identify. Be careful about footnotes. We don't want too many footnotes because that takes up kind of a whole bunch of the page. And again, for readability, you want all of those at the back.
Okay, that's great. So I guess it's just come up to 2 o'clock now. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you Olga, Michael, Gabby for presenting. Great session. And as we said, we'll follow up on those questions that we didn't quite get to, and we'll also send around the recording to everybody who missed it, and feel free to pass on to your colleagues as well. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.